He did not ask his wife to leave. He simply gave her chair to another woman and waited for the room to understand. On the 62nd floor of the Langford Hotel, above the glittering grid of New York City, the merger dinner for Hartwell Group had been arranged like a portrait of power. White orchids ran down the center of a table long enough to separate enemies without making them stand. Crystal glasses caught the amber light. Silverware rested in perfect lines. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, traffic moved far below like thin red veins through Manhattan. Every chair had a brass nameplate, polished so brightly it reflected the faces leaning over them. Marcus Hartwell sat at the center, tailored in charcoal, smiling like a man who believed the night already belonged to him. Beside him sat Sienna Vale, young, polished, and quiet in a way that looked rehearsed. Her hand rested near his wine glass, close enough for everyone at the table to notice, not close enough for anyone to call it improper. Then Evelyn Hartwell entered. She wore a simple black dress, a cream coat over one arm, and the pearl earrings her mother had given her before marriage had taught her the price of being loyal to the wrong man. She paused just inside the private dining room, not because she was afraid, but because the room had gone still in that careful, expensive way people become silent when they want to watch someone bleed without staining their own hands. Evelyn's eyes moved once across the table. The bankers, the board members, the legal team. Eleanor Pierce at the far end, older now, but still sharp enough to see everything. Then Evelyn saw the chair beside Marcus, the place where her name had sat through 10 years of dinners, fundraisers, investor meetings, and holiday galas. Her nameplate was gone. In its place, bright under the chandelier, was Sienna Vale. Marcus did not stand. He lifted his glass slightly, almost a greeting, almost a dismissal. "Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth enough to pass for kindness. "I hope you don't mind. Sienna understands the room better tonight." A small breath moved through the table. Not laughter exactly. Something worse. Permission. Sienna looked down at the nameplate as if surprised by it, then looked back at Evelyn with a soft smile that never reached her eyes. For 1 second, the city outside seemed louder than the room, horns rising from more than 600 feet below, the distant pulse of a world that did not know a wife had just been erased in front of 30 people. Evelyn did not look at Marcus's hand. She did not look at Sienna's diamonds. She did not ask where her chair had gone. She simply crossed the room, each step measured against the marble floor, and stopped at the last empty seat near the service door. No nameplate waited there, only a folded napkin and a glass of untouched water. She placed her coat over the back of the chair, sat down, and rested both hands in her lap. Across the room, Marcus smiled wider, mistaking silence for defeat. But near the door, William Ashford lowered his eyes to the leather contract folder beside his plate, and Eleanor Pierce watched Evelyn without blinking. Because Evelyn had not come to be honored. She had not even come to be seated. She had come to sign. Long before the chandeliers, before the marble floors and the 30 carefully dressed witnesses, Hartwell Group had fit inside a rented office above a dry cleaner in Queens, where the heat failed every December and the ceiling stained brown whenever it rained. Marcus used to stand at the window with his sleeves rolled up, pointing at the skyline as if ambition alone could buy a place there. Evelyn would sit at the only desk that did not wobble, building financial models on a second-hand laptop while the radiator knocked like an old heart in the wall. He had the voice people trusted. She had the numbers that made trust possible. When investors asked how a company with 4 employees and unpaid invoices could survive another quarter, Marcus gave them confidence, but Evelyn gave them proof. She rewrote projections until sunrise. She cleaned coffee rings from printed contracts before meetings. She carried banker boxes down 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for 6 months. Once, when payroll was 3 days late and Marcus locked himself in the restroom out of shame, Evelyn took off her wedding ring, folded it into a velvet pouch, and used the loan against it to keep 11 employees from missing rent. No one at the office ever knew. Marcus came out later, splashed water on his face, and told the team he had found a way. Evelyn stood behind him near the copier and smiled as they clapped. That was the pattern of their marriage, quiet sacrifice followed by public applause for him. She did not mind at first. Love had made her generous in dangerous ways. She believed building a life meant sometimes letting one person stand in the light while the other held the ladder steady in the dark. She believed Marcus remembered. For a while, maybe he did. He used to bring her deli coffee in a paper cup and kiss her forehead before investor calls. He used to say, "You are the only reason this place has a spine." But success changed the temperature of his voice. The office moved from Queens to Midtown. The broken elevator became a private one. The old laptop became a wall of screens. Reporters began asking Marcus for the secret to his rise, and he began answering before Evelyn entered the room. "I built Hartwell Group from nothing," he would say, hands folded, smile perfect, as if nothing had not included her inheritance, her sleep, her patience, and the years she spent turning his panic into strategy. At first, he forgot her in small ways. A missed anniversary dinner. Her name left off a press release. A board seat delayed because the timing was complicated. Then the forgetting became a decision. At a charity gala in Boston, he introduced Evelyn to a senator as his wife, nothing more, while the woman beside him praised his vision. Evelyn remembered the senator asking what she did, and Marcus answering for her. "She keeps me grounded." The words had sounded sweet to strangers. To Evelyn, they sounded like a door closing softly from the outside. Now, sitting at the last seat near the service door, she watched Marcus lift his glass across the Langford dining room with Sienna beside him and realized the erasure had never happened all at once. It had been practiced for years, polished slowly, until even humiliation could wear a tuxedo and call itself business. The first course arrived under silver domes, but no one reached for their fork right away. The room was waiting for Marcus, and Marcus had always loved a room that waited. He let the silence stretch just long enough to feel expensive, then rose from his chair with his glass in hand. The lights above him softened the gray at his temples and made him look almost noble, the way magazine profiles preferred him. Sienna turned toward him with perfect attention, one shoulder angled slightly toward the table, her smile small and practiced. Evelyn sat at the far end near the service door, where the air carried the faint scent of lemon polish and warm bread from the kitchen. Her water glass stood untouched beside her plate. Her napkin lay unfolded in her lap. If anyone expected her to tremble, they were disappointed. Marcus looked down the table at the bankers, the board members, the attorneys, the people who had come to witness the rescue of Hartwell Group and leave with stories they would repeat in quieter rooms. "Tonight is about the future," he said, his voice rich and steady. "A company survives because it knows when to evolve. A man survives for the same reason." A few people nodded. Someone near the center of the table gave a soft laugh, the kind offered to powerful men before they finished speaking. Marcus turned slightly, his glass lifting toward Sienna. "And I have been fortunate enough to have someone beside me who understands that future with clarity, elegance, and courage." Sienna lowered her eyes as if embarrassed, but the diamond bracelet at her wrist caught the chandelier and threw tiny flashes across the white tablecloth. Evelyn watched the light move, cold and restless, like little pieces of ice. Marcus continued, and this time his gaze found his wife. "Some people are part of the foundation," he said. "You respect them for what they helped you survive. But foundations are not where you live forever." The room changed. Not loudly. Not honestly. It changed in the way a room changes when people decide the cruel thing has been said by someone too important to challenge. One banker looked into his wine. A board member adjusted his cufflinks. Sienna touched the edge of Marcus's sleeve, a gesture small enough to deny and clear enough to wound. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the knife beside her plate. Its polished surface reflected a thin, broken version of the chandelier, and for a moment she remembered another table years ago, plastic instead of linen, takeout cartons instead of porcelain, Marcus asleep on a stack of unpaid invoices while she calculated how long they could keep the office open. Back then, the future had smelled like cold coffee and printer ink. Tonight, it smelled like orchids and expensive perfume. Marcus raised his glass higher. "To knowing what belongs in your past," he said, "and what deserves a seat in your future." Glasses lifted across the table, some slowly, some eagerly. The sound of crystal touching crystal was delicate, almost beautiful, and that made it worse. Evelyn did not lift hers. She placed her fingertips lightly on the stem of the water glass, then let them fall away. No speech, no tears, no attempt to defend a history everyone at that table had been happy to use and forget. William Ashford, seated near the door, noticed the movement and closed his hand over the leather folder beside him. Eleanor Pierce, from the far end, narrowed her eyes, not at Marcus, but at Evelyn. Because a woman who is breaking looks around for help. Evelyn was not looking for anyone. She was waiting. 6 months earlier, the first night Evelyn left the penthouse, Marcus did not follow her to the elevator. He stood in the living room with the skyline behind him, one hand in his pocket, speaking in the careful voice of a man arranging a business exit. "We need space," he had said, as if space were not already sitting between them at every breakfast table, every charity dinner, every bed turned cold by silence. Evelyn had packed 2 suitcases, not because she owned so little, but because she finally understood how much of that life had never belonged to her. She took her mother's pearls, 3 coats, a box of old notebooks, and the framed photograph from the first office in Queens. In it, Marcus was grinning beside a crooked sign taped to a glass door, and Evelyn stood slightly behind him holding a stack of folders, half her face hidden by sunlight. By midnight, she was in a 1-bedroom apartment near the Hudson River, 12 blocks from the restaurants where people used to recognize her as Mrs. Hartwell. The place was small enough that the kitchen light reached the sofa, and when the radiator clicked on, the whole room seemed to breathe. Marcus must have imagined her crying there. Maybe Sienna imagined it too, scrolling through photographs from private lounges and rooftop events, posting little glimpses of a world Evelyn had quietly helped build. Evelyn saw them once, then closed the screen and never looked again. Her revenge did not begin with a message. It began with a spreadsheet. At 5:30 each morning, before the city had fully opened its eyes, she sat by the window in a gray sweater, drinking black coffee and reading Hartwell Group's public filings line by line. She studied debt schedules the way other women studied weather reports. She marked loan maturity dates in blue ink. She circled vendor disputes, delayed payments, quiet resignations, and the strange little notes buried deep in quarterly statements, the kind written small because someone hoped no one patient would read them. Marcus still appeared on television smiling beside the company logo, telling anchors that Hartwell Group was entering its most ambitious chapter. Evelyn watched without sound. His mouth moved. The numbers told the truth. By February, she knew the company was not expanding. It was gasping behind tinted glass. By March, she knew which lenders were nervous. By April, she knew which board members had begun answering calls from unknown buyers. She did not rush. She did not brag. She sold the last pieces of a life she no longer wanted, moved old equity through legal channels, and brought every document to William Ashford, a lawyer with silver hair, steady eyes, and a reputation for making powerful men read the fine print too late. The first time he reviewed her plan, he looked at her for a long moment over the rim of his glasses. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "this is not a divorce strategy." Evelyn looked out at the river, where a ferry cut a white line through the dark water. "No," she answered. "It is a correction." From that morning on, Black Harbor holdings began to appear in places Marcus never thought to look, buying quiet pieces, collecting quiet leverage, becoming the hand beneath the table while he polished the performance above it. By May, Black Harbor Holdings had become the name Marcus praised in meetings without understanding whose hand was behind it. To him, it was a disciplined investment group from Delaware, quiet, well capitalized, exactly the kind of buyer that could step into a difficult balance sheet and make panic look like strategy. He told the board it was a miracle of timing. He told the banks it proved the market still believed in him. He told Sienna, over breakfast at the penthouse Evelyn had once decorated room by room, that some people were simply born to be rescued by fortune. Evelyn heard none of it from his mouth. She heard it through term sheets, board minutes, revised projections, and the careful reports William Ashford placed across her small kitchen table every Thursday evening. The apartment always smelled faintly of coffee and rain then, the Hudson dark beyond the window, the city lights trembling on the glass. William would remove his gloves, take out a fountain pen, and walk her through each step with the patience of a man teaching someone how to enter a locked room without leaving fingerprints on the door. Black Harbor had acquired the nervous loans first. Then came minority positions from shareholders tired of Marcus's speeches. Then the private agreements, the voting rights, the quiet authority tucked inside documents he had never expected anyone loyal to Evelyn to read. Every signature was clean. Every transfer was legal. Every move had been built from the one thing Marcus never respected enough to fear, Evelyn's memory. She remembered which lender he had charmed and which one he had insulted. She remembered which director hated uncertainty more than scandal. She remembered the supplier who had waited 9 months to be paid because Marcus wanted the office renovation finished before settling old invoices. She remembered everything because for years she had been the person cleaning up after brilliance that confused itself with leadership. One night, William paused over the final acquisition draft and looked at her apartment. The plain white cabinets, the coat folded over a wooden chair, the single framed photograph from Queens still face down on the counter. Once this is signed, he said carefully, there will be no version of this marriage left to save. Evelyn did not answer right away. Outside, a fairy horn moved through the dark, low and lonely, as if the river itself were warning her to choose with both eyes open. She thought of the seat beside Marcus, not yet stolen in public, but already gone in private. She thought of his voice saying space, of Sienna appearing in photographs under lights Evelyn had paid to keep burning. Then she thought of the 11 employees from the old office, the wedding ring in the velvet pouch, the years she had mistaken endurance for love. There has not been a marriage for a long time, she said at last. William nodded once, not with pity, but with respect. Then he turned the contract toward her. At the bottom of the page, beneath final buyer approval, her name waited in a clean black line, no longer hidden behind his. The invitation arrived 3 days after Evelyn signed the buyer approval, delivered by courier in a cream envelope thick enough to announce arrogance before it was opened. Her name was written in Marcus's assistant's handwriting, not his. Evelyn placed it on the kitchen counter beside a mug of black coffee and the final contract binder William had left behind. For a long moment, she did not touch it. Rain moved softly against the window, blurring the Hudson into a sheet of silver, and the apartment held the clean silence of a life that had stopped begging to be chosen. When she finally opened the envelope, a formal card slid out, embossed with the Hartwell Group seal she had once helped design at a kitchen table in Queens. The dinner would be held at the Langford Hotel, 62nd floor, private dining room, 7 o'clock in the evening. Beneath the printed details, Marcus had added one line in blue ink, sharp and deliberate. Personal feelings aside, I believe you should attend. Evelyn read the sentence twice, not because it hurt, but because it revealed how little he had learned. Marcus still believed attendance was obedience. He still believed a room could decide a woman's worth if enough important people watched her stand alone. He had invited her not as a partner, not as a founder, not even as the woman who had carried his company through its first winter, but as a witness to her own replacement. The old Evelyn might have folded the card back into its envelope and felt her chest tighten around words she would never say. This Evelyn set it down beside the buyer approval and looked at the two documents together. One was an insult dressed in stationery. The other was ownership dressed in law. William called that afternoon, his voice measured as always. You do not have to be in the room, he said. I can sign as representative. Evelyn stood by the closet, looking at the black dress hanging between winter coats, simple, exact, quiet enough to make louder things look desperate. No, she said. He asked me to attend. William understood the answer behind the answer. He did not argue. That evening, Evelyn prepared without ceremony. She did not call a makeup artist. She did not choose diamonds. She pinned her hair low at the back of her neck, fastened her mother's pearl earrings, and placed a thin watch on her wrist, the same one she had worn during the first investor meeting 12 years ago. In the mirror, she saw no dramatic transformation, no stranger returned from some brighter life. She saw the woman who had always been there, only no longer standing behind anyone. Before leaving, she opened the old photograph from Queens and turned it face up on the counter. Marcus smiled from inside the frame, young and hungry, unaware that the woman half hidden in sunlight would one day become the only person patient enough to read the ending before he did. Downstairs, the car waited at the curb. Manhattan was already glowing, wet streets shining under taxi lights, steam rising from grates like the city exhaling secrets. Evelyn stepped into the back seat with the contract folder on her lap and the invitation tucked inside it, insult and answer pressed together. As the car pulled toward Midtown, she did not rehearse a speech. She did not imagine Marcus apologizing. She only watched the towers grow taller through the rain and let the silence settle around her like a coat. By the time the Langford Hotel came into view, she was not arriving as a wife who had been summoned. She was arriving as the signature they had been waiting for. The toast passed through the room like a cold draft, leaving behind the kind of silence no waiter was trained to fix. Plates were cleared. Wine was poured again. Conversations returned in small, careful pieces, but the table never fully recovered its warmth. Evelyn remained at the far end near the service door, close enough to hear the kitchen doors breathe open and closed, far enough for Marcus to enjoy the distance he had created. He believed distance was power. He believed the center chair, the chandelier above him, and Sienna beside him could make history rearrange itself in his favor. Across the linen and crystal, Sienna leaned toward him with a smile polished for witnesses. She asked him something too quiet for the room, and Marcus answered with a low laugh meant to travel. After tonight, he said, not loudly, but with perfect aim, everyone will understand who was built for this world and who was only passing through it. Evelyn heard him. She did not turn her head. She lifted her water glass, touched it lightly to her lips, and set it down without drinking. The movement was so calm that Eleanor Pierce, seated near the head of the table, stopped listening to the banker beside her. Eleanor had known 3 generations of executives, men who hid fear beneath charm and failure beneath expensive suits. She had watched Marcus do both for years. But Evelyn was different tonight. Not wounded, not defensive, not waiting for permission to exist. She sat as if the last chair at the table had never been a punishment, only a place with a better view of the room. William Ashford sat a few feet away, the leather folder beside his plate untouched. Every few minutes, his hand moved to it, and then away, patient as a clock. The merger documents were scheduled for presentation after dessert, according to the printed agenda, resting beside each place setting. Marcus had insisted on ceremony. He wanted the board, the banks, the legal team, and his chosen future all present when Hartwell Group was saved under his name. He wanted applause contained by glass walls 62 stories above Manhattan. He wanted Evelyn to witness the rescue and mistake it for proof that he had never needed her. Dessert arrived in thin porcelain bowls, something delicate with gold leaf that no one seemed hungry enough to finish. Marcus spoke easily through it, explaining expansion, confidence, the next chapter. His words were smooth, but Evelyn heard the small breaks underneath. A number skipped. A date softened. A debt described as temporary when the papers in William's folder had called it critical. The room believed the performance because wealth often teaches people to trust the suit before the substance. Evelyn had once done the same. Not anymore. She looked past Marcus to the windows behind him, where New York glittered in clean vertical lines, each tower holding thousands of lit rooms, each room hiding someone's version of ambition, betrayal, or survival. Below, traffic curved along the avenue in red and white threads. For the first time all night, she allowed herself one quiet breath. Marcus noticed and mistook it for surrender. He leaned back, placed 2 fingers on the stem of his wine glass, and smiled toward the attorneys. Shall we make history? William Ashford finally lifted the leather folder from the table. Eleanor Pierce straightened in her chair. Sienna's bracelet flashed once under the chandelier. And Evelyn, still seated at the end of the table, folded her hands as the contract began its journey toward the man who did not know he was no longer the buyer. William Ashford did not rush. He opened the leather folder with the quiet care of a man handling something heavier than paper, and the sound of the cover folding back seemed to travel farther than Marcus expected. The attorneys leaned in. The bankers straightened. A server near the wall stopped moving with a silver coffee pot in his hand, sensing the room had shifted from dinner to judgment. Marcus extended his hand for the pen before anyone offered it to him. Let us proceed, he said, smiling at the board as if the sentence itself were a signature. William looked down at the top page, then at Marcus. Before Mr. Hartwell signs, the buyer has requested one final amendment to be acknowledged in person. Marcus blinked once. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but Evelyn saw it from the end of the table. The first crack in the performance. That was not on the agenda, Marcus said. William remained calm. It was added by controlling authority this afternoon. A low murmur moved through the table. Sienna's smile thinned, not gone, but uncertain around the edges. Marcus placed his glass down a little too carefully. Then where is the buyer representative? William did not answer him. He turned, lifted the final packet from the folder, and placed it on the empty space before Evelyn. For a moment, nobody understood what they were seeing. The distance between the head of the table and the last chair became the longest line in the room. Evelyn looked at the document. She did not look surprised. She did not look triumphant. She simply placed one hand on the edge of the table and stood. Her chair slid back over the marble floor with a soft, clean sound. It was not loud, but every conversation died under it. Marcus stared at her as if she had stepped out of a photograph he had already thrown away. Sienna turned toward him, waiting for a laugh, a correction, anything that would make the room safe again. None came. Evelyn walked forward, past the bankers who had once ignored her during introductions, past the board members who had accepted her ideas when Marcus repeated them, past Eleanor Pierce, who lowered her chin in a gesture that looked almost like respect. The chandelier poured light over Evelyn's black dress and the pearls at her ears, but she carried no glamour like a weapon. She carried stillness. When she reached the head of the table, William turned the last page toward her. Marcus found his voice, but not his control. "Evelyn, this is a closed transaction." She uncapped the pen. "Yes," she said softly. "That is why I am here." The page waited under her hand. At the bottom, beneath, "Authorized buyer," the printed line read Black Harbor Holdings. Below it, in black ink, Evelyn signed her full name. Evelyn Hartwell, founder and principal. For 3 seconds, no one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Then paper seemed to become louder than people. Marcus looked from the signature to William, then back to Evelyn, the color draining from his confidence before it left his face. Sienna's hand slipped away from the back of his chair. Eleanor Pierce closed her eyes for one brief second, as if a fact she had known for years had finally been entered into the record. Marcus whispered, "Black Harbor is yours?" Evelyn placed the pen beside the contract, perfectly parallel to the page. "No," she said. "Black Harbor is mine. Hartwell Group is now under its control." For a moment, the 62nd floor of the Langford Hotel seemed suspended above Manhattan by silence alone. Marcus kept his eyes on the signature, as if staring hard enough could make the ink retreat back into the pen. Around him, the room rearranged itself without anyone moving very far. The bankers no longer looked at him first. The attorneys turned toward William Ashford. The board members read the final page with the pale concentration of people discovering that the future had changed while dessert was still on the table. Sienna sat very still, her hand now folded in her own lap, the chair beside Marcus suddenly looking less like a prize and more like a mistake placed under bright lights. Marcus swallowed, then forced out a laugh that had no warmth in it. "This is absurd," he said. "You cannot just walk into my company and take control." Evelyn looked at him then, fully, for the first time all evening. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the calm attention she used to give broken numbers at 2 in the morning. "I did not walk in," she said. "I read what you stopped reading." William stood beside her and adjusted the top sheet. Under the completed acquisition terms, Black Harbor Holdings assumes controlling interest effective immediately. The current executive structure will be reviewed by the new ownership board. Marcus turned sharply to the directors, waiting for loyalty to rise. It did not. Loyalty, Evelyn had learned, was easy to demand when someone else paid the cost. Eleanor Pierce removed her glasses, folded them, and placed them beside her plate. "Mr. Hartwell," she said quietly, "the documents are in order." That sentence did what no raised voice could have done. It ended the performance. Marcus's shoulders lowered by a fraction, almost invisible, but Evelyn saw it. She had seen him stand taller through lies, charm his way through debt, smile through meetings where disaster sat under every spreadsheet. She had also seen the boy from Queens fall asleep over unpaid invoices, dreaming of a skyline he did not yet deserve. For one brief second, sadness passed through her, not for the man he had become, but for the years she had spent protecting him from becoming it alone. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice as if privacy could still be claimed in a room full of witnesses. "Evelyn, we can discuss this." She closed the contract folder. "We already did. You called it space." The words landed softly, but even Sienna looked away. Evelyn handed the folder to William, then lifted her coat from the back of the chair that had never carried her name. No one stopped her. No one asked where she was going. The room understood, at last, that she had not come to compete for a seat beside Marcus. She had come to remove the table from under him. As she passed Eleanor, the older woman gave a small nod, the kind that belonged less to victory than to recognition. Marcus called her name once more. This time, it was not polished. It was small enough to sound almost true. Evelyn paused near the door, her hand resting lightly on the brass handle. She did not turn around. "You wanted me to see what real success looked like," she said. "So I came." Then she opened the door and stepped into the quiet hallway. Behind her, the dining room remained bright, crowded, and suddenly powerless. Ahead of her, the elevator doors reflected a woman in black, pearls at her ears, posture steady, eyes clear. Far below, New York moved in rivers of yellow taxis and white headlights, alive with people who would never know what had ended above them. When the elevator arrived, Evelyn stepped inside alone. Just before the doors closed, she looked at her reflection and breathed as if, for the first time in years, the air belonged entirely to her. She did not destroy him. She simply stopped protecting him from the truth.